The restaurant was already busy before the sun had fully gone down. Plates moved quickly from the kitchen to the tables. Glasses clinked, and low conversations blended into a constant hum. It was the kind of place people visited after long workdays, hoping for warm food and a short escape. In one corner of the room stood a polished piano, black and shiny under the soft lights. It was there mostly for show during the day, waiting for the evening performer who played on weekends. Most customers noticed it only when they first walked in, then forgot about it. She had been on her feet since early afternoon. Her shift started before the dinner rush, and by now her legs ached in a dull, familiar way. She moved between tables with practiced ease, balancing plates and smiling politely. Even when her feet begged her to slow down, she wore the same simple uniform she always did, clean but slightly worn from many washes. To most people in the room, she was just another waitress doing her job. She had learned long ago how to blend into the background. She knew how to listen without really listening, how to nod at the right moments, and how to apologize even when things were not her fault. Customers often spoke over her, waved her down with quick gestures, or called out without looking at her face. None of it surprised her anymore. She focused on getting orders right and keeping tables happy. That was what paid the bills. Still, there were moments when her attention drifted. Almost without thinking, her eyes would move toward the piano. It happened whenever she passed that side of the room. She never stared too long, but the pull was strong. The smooth surface, the quiet weight of it, the way it seemed to hold sound inside it all felt familiar to her in a way she could not explain to anyone at work. She always looked away quickly, afraid someone might notice. Her life outside the restaurant was simple. She lived in a small apartment with thin walls and old pipes that rattled at night. The rent was cheap, and that mattered more than comfort. She shared the space with no one, and most evenings were quiet. After work, she usually ate something small and went to bed early. On her days off, she ran errands, cleaned, and sometimes sat by the window with a book. It was not a life filled with excitement, but it was steady. Music was a part of her past that rarely came up now. It existed in memories she kept close and private. She did not talk about it with coworkers, and she avoided questions that might lead there. It felt safer that way. People often judged what they did not understand, and she had learned to protect the parts of herself that mattered most. The restaurant staff moved like a system that had been running for years. The cooks shouted short instructions from the kitchen. Servers passed each other without collision, calling out table numbers and orders. The manager stayed near the front, watching everything with careful eyes. He cared deeply about reviews and appearances. Mistakes were not welcomed, especially during busy hours. She knew her role well. She knew which tables tipped well and which ones did not. She knew which customers liked extra attention and which ones wanted to be left alone. Tonight, one group in particular stood out. They had arrived earlier than most and ordered drinks before even opening their menus. Their laughter was loud and careless, filling the space around them. They leaned back in their chairs as if they owned the place. She approached their table with her usual calm smile. They barely looked up when she asked for their order. One of them made a joke to the others that she pretended not to hear. Another glanced at her name tag, then away again. She took their orders, wrote everything down neatly, and moved on. She had dealt with people like them many times before. As the evening went on, the noise in the restaurant grew. More tables filled, and the air became warm with the smell of food and coffee. She moved faster now, her steps light but steady. Every so often, her eyes returned to the piano without her meaning to. It sat quietly, waiting, just as it always did. At one point, while refilling water glasses near the piano, she paused for half a second longer than usual. Her fingers tightened slightly around the pitcher. She imagined the feel of the keys under her hands, cool and smooth. The thought came and went quickly. She shook it off and continued working. This was not the place for that part of her. The customers at the loud table noticed her glances. At first, it was just a passing comment between them. Then it became something they watched for. They saw the way her eyes softened when she looked at the piano, the way she seemed to slow down for just a moment. To them, it was amusing. To them, it was something to tease. They whispered among themselves, laughing quietly. One of them pointed toward the piano when she walked away. Another shrugged and took a sip of his drink. None of them thought deeply about it. They were bored, looking for entertainment, and she happened to be nearby. She returned to their table to check on their food. Everything was fine, they said, though one of them smirked as he spoke. She asked if they needed anything else. They said no, not yet. As she turned to leave, She felt their eyes on her back. She did not know why, but a small knot of discomfort formed in her stomach. The restaurant lights dimmed slightly as evening fully settled in. Soft music played through hidden speakers, filling the spaces between conversations. The piano remained silent. She knew that on some nights, a hired player would arrive later. Tonight was not one of those nights. She kept working, unaware that a moment was slowly building toward her. For now, it was just another shift, another night of carrying plates, smiling politely, and keeping parts of herself hidden. She had no idea that before the night was over, the quiet balance she relied on would be broken. As she passed the piano one more time, her reflection caught her eye in its polished surface. For a brief second, she saw not just a waitress, but someone else she used to be. Then the sound of a customer calling her name snapped her back to the present. She turned, lifted her chin, and walked toward the next table, unaware that the attention she had tried so hard to avoid was already finding her. The group at the corner table had finished most of their food but lingered, talking and laughing in low, mocking tones. They had been watching her quietly for some time, amused by the subtle glances she gave toward the piano. One of them, leaning back in his chair with a smirk, whispered something to his friends that made all of them chuckle. The words were careless, meant to provoke amusement, not to harm. But sometimes, cruelty hides in such small, thoughtless moments. I bet she can't play a single note. One of them said under his breath, just loud enough for his friends to hear. She looks like she'd break the keys if she tried. The others laughed softly, trying not to draw attention from other diners. They weren't cruel in a serious way, they just liked the idea of poking fun, of seeing someone out of their element. But they didn't know her. They had no idea of the hours she had spent at a piano when no one else was watching. How music had been a quiet companion through lonely nights, or how her fingers remembered every key from years of practice. One of them, bolder than the rest, leaned toward the edge of the table and raised his voice slightly. "Hey, why don't you prove us wrong?" He called out toward her as she passed by with a tray of water glasses. "Play something on the piano. Come on, we won't bite." The words floated through the air, and for a brief moment, she froze. She had been trained to ignore comments, to stay polite and professional. But this was different. This wasn't a request for service. It was an invitation to step into the spotlight, a place she had long avoided. Her heart beat faster, and she glanced toward the piano instinctively. It sat there, polished and silent, waiting. She had never played there in front of the customers, never allowed anyone to see that side of her. And now, with all eyes turning in her direction, it seemed as if the world had shrunk to the small space between the table and the piano. She tried to ignore them. She smiled politely, keeping her tone calm. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I'm just working tonight." She turned quickly and moved toward the next table, hoping the moment would pass. But it didn't. The group's laughter and whispers followed her. "Come on, don't be shy," the bold one insisted. "Just one song. We'll clap, we promise." Her stomach twisted. She had 1,000 reasons to refuse. The manager was watching from the front, busy with other diners, but always aware of the room. She didn't want to embarrass herself or be forced into something she didn't agree to. She had always hidden this part of herself, and yet a strange feeling stirred within her, a part of her that had long been quiet, waiting for a chance to breathe. She shook her head and tried to focus on her work, but the voices kept tugging at her attention. Other customers had begun to notice the conversation. Heads turned, curious glances swept the room, and whispers started spreading. What would the waitress do? Could she really play? Or would she stumble? Her hands trembled slightly as she refilled another glass. She had learned to control her nerves over the years, but this was different. This was not a regular customer question, not a small mistake that could be smoothed over. This was exposure, vulnerability, and for a moment, she wondered if she could even go through with it. The group at the corner table noticed her hesitation and took it as encouragement. "You're too scared, aren't you?" one of them teased, leaning forward with a grin. "I thought maybe you actually knew something, but I guess not." A flush of frustration rose in her chest. Their words were meant to provoke, to make her feel small, but instead, they lit something else inside her, a spark of defiance. She had spent years hiding, but the music she loved had never left her. The piano had been her refuge, her friend in times when the world felt cold and empty. And suddenly, the idea of proving herself not to them, but to herself felt stronger than the fear. She set the tray down carefully on the side table, letting it slide without a sound. Her legs felt heavy but determined as she walked toward the piano. The room grew quieter as people sensed the tension. Conversation stalled. Even the bold group's laughter faltered, replaced by curious, questioning looks. She paused in front of the piano, placing her hands lightly on the keys. The black and white surfaces felt smooth under her fingertips, familiar and welcoming. A strange calmness settled over her. Despite the pounding of her heart, she took a deep breath and allowed her fingers to find their place. The first note she played was soft, almost hesitant. It floated through the air like a single drop of water in a quiet room. Then another, and another, forming a simple melody. The patrons around her leaned forward slightly, surprised. They had expected awkwardness, maybe a stammering attempt, but not this. Her confidence grew as she continued. The initial hesitation melted into fluidity. She didn't glance at the bold group or the curious diners. She didn't think about judgment or mockery. She simply let the music guide her. Each note told a story of patience, of long nights practicing alone, of dreams kept quiet. The group at the corner table froze. Their smirks vanished as the notes carried through the room. They had thought this would be a joke, a moment of harmless ridicule. Instead, they were witnessing something extraordinary. The music wasn't just skillful, it was alive. It spoke of emotion, of depth, of a life hidden behind a uniform and polite smiles. Other diners started to notice too. Phones appeared discreetly as people captured the moment. The soft hum of conversation turned into silence, replaced by the sound of the piano. Even the manager, busy with tables, paused in his steps and turned to watch, surprised at the skill unfolding before him. She allowed herself to move freely now, letting her hands express what words never could. The melodies grew richer, more confident. Each chord resonated with clarity, echoing through the room and touching everyone who listened. It was as if the piano had been waiting for this moment, and now it could finally speak through her. The bold group's laughter was gone. They watched, mouths slightly open, their earlier amusement replaced by awe and disbelief. They had intended to humiliate, to tease, and yet the very thing they had mocked had transformed into something breathtaking. Her mind was focused entirely on the music. She didn't look around, didn't think about the attention she was getting. All that mattered was the connection between her fingers and the keys, the flow of sound that carried her past fear and doubt. She felt alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. Minutes passed like seconds. When she reached the end of the piece, she held the final note, letting it linger. The room remained still for a heartbeat, as if holding its breath. And then, slowly, applause began. One table started, then another, until the entire restaurant was clapping. People stood, some cheering, some whistling, all expressing their surprise and admiration. She blinked, momentarily stunned. The experience had been private in her mind for so long, never shared, never witnessed. And now, here it was, unfolding in front of everyone. The music had not just silenced ridicule, it had transformed it into appreciation, respect, even wonder. The group at the corner table looked down at their hands, ashamed. Their prank had failed in a way they had never imagined. What they had thought would be embarrassing had instead revealed something remarkable. They exchanged awkward glances, muttered apologies, and avoided her eyes. She stood quietly, letting the applause wash over her. She did not smile immediately. Her emotions were too raw, too overwhelming. Relief, pride, and joy battled with the lingering nervousness. She finally allowed herself a small, tentative smile, acknowledging the recognition she had earned not because of a prank, but because of years of quiet dedication and hidden talent. The manager approached, a mixture of surprise and admiration in his expression. "That was incredible," he said simply. He had not known she could play at this level. He glanced toward the group who had instigated the prank and shook his head. "They owe you an apology," he added quietly. The piano sat quietly now, as if satisfied. The music had done its work. The room slowly returned to normal, but the energy had changed. Conversations carried a new warmth, filled with smiles and excited whispers about the unexpected performance. People lingered at their tables, reluctant to leave the magic behind. For her, the night had shifted. She had stepped into the spotlight she had long avoided and found herself capable, strong, and seen. It was a victory not just over the prank, but over years of self-doubt and fear of judgment. The music had spoken for her when words could not. Even as she returned to her duties, refilling glasses and taking orders, a quiet confidence remained. The piano was no longer just a piece of furniture, it was a reminder of who she was, of her talent, and of the respect she had earned that evening. She knew that her life, even in small ways, had changed. She had been recognized, admired, and, most importantly, she had faced fear and come through stronger than before. The group at the corner table left quietly soon after, their prank forgotten and replaced by respect. Other diners continued to talk about what they had witnessed, sharing stories with friends and family. And in the midst of it all, she continued her work with calm grace, carrying herself differently now, silently proud of the music she had shared with the world, even if only for a few unforgettable minutes. By the time her shift ended, the restaurant was closing. Chairs were stacked, tables wiped clean, and the lights dimmed further. She walked past the piano one last time, fingers brushing the keys lightly as if saying goodbye for the night. She felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense that something had shifted inside her permanently. The world had seen her talent, and she had stepped out of the shadows, even if only briefly. And as she locked the doors behind her and stepped into the cool night air, she carried with her a sense of possibility she had not felt in years. She knew the prank had not been harmless. It had forced her into a situation she never expected. But in the end, it had led to something far greater than she could have imagined. She had found her voice, her courage, and her music had finally been heard. The night after the piano performance, the restaurant felt quieter than usual. The shift had ended, and she had gone home carrying a strange mixture of exhaustion and excitement. She replayed the evening in her mind as she walked through the dim streets, her footsteps echoing softly on the pavement. The music lingered in her memory like a warm light, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of accomplishment that was entirely her own. When she returned to her small apartment, she leaned against the door for a moment, letting herself breathe. The room was modest, filled with the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint sounds of distant traffic. She kicked off her shoes and dropped her bag on the bed, collapsing onto it with a sigh. Her body ached, but it was the kind of tired that came from having done something meaningful, not just from the grind of routine labor. She thought about the prank, the group of customers who had expected to humiliate her. She felt a small twinge of anger when she remembered their smirks, but it was overshadowed by the memory of the music she had created. She had turned their mockery into admiration without even trying. That thought brought a small smile to her face. The next day at work was different. News of the performance had spread quietly among the staff and the regulars. A few co-workers approached her with hesitant smiles. "That was amazing last night," one of them said, looking almost shy. "I didn't know you could play like that." She nodded politely, feeling a blush rise in her cheeks. She was unused to compliments, especially for something she had kept hidden for so long. "Thank you," she said softly, hoping her voice sounded calm. Inside, she felt a mix of pride and embarrassment. Pride because she had shown herself. Embarrassment because she had never intended for anyone to see this side of her. The manager called her aside briefly. His expression was a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "I had no idea," he said. "You should really consider playing here more often." People loved it. She shook her head quickly. "I'm just a waitress," she said. I'm not a performer here." He studied her for a moment, as if trying to read her mind. "You don't have to perform if you don't want to," he said gently. "But you clearly have a gift. Don't ignore it just because you're not used to being seen." She nodded, not sure what to say. She appreciated the support, but felt vulnerable. Her music had always been private, a secret part of herself that no one could touch. Now, that secret had been exposed, and even though it had been received with admiration, she wasn't entirely sure she wanted it to be. The day passed slowly. She moved between tables with her usual efficiency, but there was a quiet tension underneath her routine. Every time she walked past the piano, she felt a flutter in her chest. She wanted to avoid it, yet the pull was irresistible. It had been a source of comfort, a friend she had known for years, and now it had become a symbol of both courage and vulnerability. That evening, the restaurant filled quickly. The corner table from the previous night had returned, this time with a quieter, more reserved demeanor. They avoided eye contact, their earlier confidence replaced by discomfort. They had spent the day replaying the performance in their minds, realizing how completely they had misjudged her. When she approached their table to take their order, their voices were softer, hesitant. "We just drinks tonight," one of them said quickly, avoiding her gaze. She nodded politely, keeping her tone neutral. She had no intention of bringing up the performance, but she couldn't help noticing the subtle change in their behavior. They seemed smaller somehow, less sure of themselves. The power dynamic from the night before had shifted, and they were aware of it. As she moved through the restaurant, she noticed other customers whispering and glancing toward the piano. Some were curious if she would play again, while others simply wanted to relive the memory of the night before. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Though no one spoke openly about it, the manager approached her again during a lull in the service. "People are asking if you'll play again tonight," he said. "You don't have to, of course. But if you do, it would make the evening unforgettable." She hesitated, unsure. Part of her wanted to retreat, to stay in the safety of routine. But another part, the part that had felt alive the night before, urged her to sit at the piano once more. She took a deep breath and nodded slightly. I'll see," she said quietly. As the evening progressed, the restaurant grew busier. Orders came in faster, plates moved more quickly, and the hum of conversation filled the air. She moved with practiced grace, but her mind kept drifting toward the piano. Every so often, she glanced at it, imagining the feel of the keys under her fingers, the sound of the notes filling the room. Finally, as a brief lull occurred, one of the regular customers called out, "Would you play for us tonight?" The request was polite but filled with genuine hope. The room fell silent for a moment, all eyes on her. She felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but also the quiet strength that had carried her through the previous night. She walked to the piano, each step deliberate. She sat down, her fingers hovering above the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The room waited, holding its collective breath. She began to play, slowly at first, testing the keys, letting the melody find its way. The music started softly, almost shyly, but it grew steadily, filling the room with warmth and depth. This time, she allowed herself more freedom, letting her emotions guide her hands. Each note carried a story of struggle, of quiet perseverance, of hidden talent waiting to be recognized. The diners were mesmerized. Conversations ceased, phones were lowered, and even the staff stopped their work briefly to listen. The bold group from the corner table sat frozen, their earlier bravado replaced by awe. They had expected awkwardness or failure, but instead, they were witnessing beauty that demanded respect. Her confidence grew with each passing moment. She moved through the melodies effortlessly, her fingers dancing across the keys with precision and grace. The music was no longer just sound, it was a presence in the room, commanding attention and stirring emotion. The atmosphere shifted completely. What had been a simple restaurant meal transformed into a shared experience, a collective moment of wonder. People were smiling, some with tears in their eyes, moved by the unexpected gift of music. She felt a deep connection with everyone in the room, a sense of belonging that she had rarely experienced outside of her private practice. Even the manager watched with admiration, realizing that the performance had elevated the entire evening. He had never seen a waitress command such attention, and he knew that this was something special. As the piece reached its climax, she allowed herself to pour everything into the music. Her past, her struggles, her hidden talents, all were expressed through the keys. The notes carried emotion so pure that the room seemed to hold its breath with her. When the final note lingered and faded, the silence that followed was profound. And then, as if released from a spell, the restaurant erupted into applause. People stood, cheered, and clapped, some whistling and shouting their admiration. The room was alive with appreciation, and for a moment, she allowed herself to soak it in. The bold group at the corner table looked down, ashamed and humbled. They had intended to ridicule her, but she had turned their prank into a triumph. They muttered apologies, but she barely heard them. Her focus was on the warmth, the respect, and the acknowledgement she had received. After the applause died down, she returned to her duties, moving among the tables with a quiet confidence. The energy in the room had shifted. Patrons were smiling more openly, conversations were lighter, and the restaurant felt brighter. She carried herself differently now, aware of her own strength and the respect she had earned. The manager approached her once more before the end of the night. "You really have something special," he said quietly. "Don't hide it. People want to see it. We want to see it." She nodded, feeling a mixture of gratitude and humility. She didn't yet know how much of herself she wanted to share, but she realized that hiding forever was no longer an option. The music was a part of her, and the world had now witnessed it. As she closed the restaurant and walked home under the quiet night sky, she felt a profound sense of change. The prank that had begun as a moment of embarrassment had become a turning point, revealing not just her talent but her courage. She had faced judgment, fear, and exposure, and had transformed it into something beautiful and unforgettable. She reached her apartment, opened the door, and leaned against it, letting herself breathe. Her hands were still tingling from the performance, a reminder of the connection she had shared with the room. The music had not only been heard, it had been felt. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine possibilities beyond the routine of work and survival. Perhaps there were opportunities she had never considered, doors that could open now that the world had seen her gift. But even without answers, she felt lighter, freer, and more alive than she had in a long time. The night stretched on, quiet and comforting, and she finally sat down at the small keyboard in her apartment, her fingers tracing familiar keys. The music she had played earlier flowed through her again, not for an audience this time, but for herself. And in that private space, she felt the true power of what had happened, the courage to be seen, the strength to step forward, and the joy of sharing a hidden part of herself with the world. The days after her second performance passed in a strange blur. The restaurant seemed normal on the surface. Customers came and went, plates clattered, and orders were shouted across the room, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity she could feel in the air. People whispered as she passed, stole glances at her when she walked by, and some even lingered longer than necessary at their tables, hoping for a repeat of the unexpected music they had witnessed. She tried to ignore the attention, focusing on her work as she always had. Refilling drinks, taking orders, and clearing tables required all of her energy, and she preferred it that way. But every time she walked past the piano, she felt its pull. The keys seemed to call to her, reminding her of the music she had shared and the quiet thrill that had filled her the night before. Her co-workers noticed the subtle change in her demeanor. She moved with a little more confidence, her posture more upright, her smile steadier. One of them, a server who had been working there for years, commented quietly, "You're different lately. Happier, I think." She gave a small, almost embarrassed smile and said nothing. Words felt inadequate to explain the mix of pride, nervousness, and excitement she carried. The group of customers who had tried the prank returned more than once. Each time, they avoided drawing attention, but she noticed their glances. They had learned their lesson about underestimating her. The smirks were gone, replaced by careful observation, almost as if they were waiting for her to make another mistake. But she had no intention of disappointing anyone or proving them right. One evening, during a particularly busy shift, the manager pulled her aside. His face was serious, but his eyes held a glimmer of excitement. "There's been some talk about your performance," he said quietly. "People are asking if you'd be willing to play more often, maybe even on a regular schedule." "I didn't expect this to happen so quickly." She shook her head, feeling a mix of pride and apprehension. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she admitted. "I'm not a performer. I'm just the waitress." He nodded, understanding her hesitation. "You're more than that," he said gently. "You have something people want to see and hear. And who knows, this could open doors you've never even considered." She left the conversation with a heavy heart. The idea of being seen and praised was both thrilling and terrifying. Her music had always been private, a part of her soul she had kept for herself. But the reality was undeniable. She had been seen, heard, and appreciated. And now, the possibility of stepping further into the light was both inviting and frightening. That evening, the restaurant was busier than usual. A group of new diners had come in, having heard about her piano performances from friends or online posts. They were eager to see if the stories were true. As she moved between tables, taking orders and refilling drinks, she felt their anticipation as a physical weight. The piano called to her, more insistently than ever, and she felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. Finally, a customer approached her with a polite request. "Would you mind playing for us?" he asked quietly. "I heard about your performance, and, well, everyone is talking about it. We'd love to hear you play." She hesitated, fingers brushing against her apron nervously. The words stirred something deep inside her, a combination of fear and longing. She looked toward the piano, the polished black surface reflecting the soft lights of the restaurant. For a moment, she wondered if she could decline, but the pull of the music was too strong. She nodded slightly and walked toward the instrument. As she sat down, the room fell into a hush. Diners leaned forward, curious and expectant. Even the staff paused their work, watching her with quiet awe. She closed her eyes briefly, letting herself breathe and feel the weight of the moment. Then, slowly, her fingers found the keys. The first notes were delicate, gentle, almost shy, but as she continued, her confidence grew. She allowed herself to become fully immersed in the music, letting her emotions guide her fingers. Each chord, each melody, was infused with years of practice, dedication, and hidden passion. The room seemed to shift with her, the ordinary clatter of the restaurant fading away as the music took over. People were captivated. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, phones were lowered, and all eyes were on her. Even the group who had instigated the prank looked on, unable to hide their astonishment. They had thought they were clever, thinking they could embarrass her, but now they saw her talent in its full glory. Their amusement was replaced by respect, and a hint of shame lingered in their expressions. As she played, she noticed something else. People were responding emotionally. Some diners had tears in their eyes, others smiled with quiet amazement. She felt a deep connection to the room, a shared understanding that transcended words. The music was no longer just a performance. It was a conversation, an intimate exchange with everyone present. Her confidence soared. The melodies became more complex, flowing effortlessly from her mind to her fingers. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was an extension of herself, a channel for her emotions and thoughts. She played not for recognition or approval, but because it was a part of her being, a truth she could no longer hide. The applause at the end of her performance was thunderous. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, some whistling, others shouting their admiration. She felt a rush of emotion, a mixture of relief, pride, and exhilaration. For the first time, she realized the full impact of her talent, not just on herself, but on those around her. The bold group who had planned the prank sat quietly, humbled. Their earlier confidence had been completely dismantled by her skill. They muttered apologies, their heads lowered, but she barely noticed. Her focus was on the warmth of the room, the acknowledgement of her effort, and the joy that came from sharing a hidden part of herself. The manager approached her again, his expression a mix of pride and excitement. "You've changed the entire atmosphere tonight," he said softly. "People are talking about you everywhere. You should consider making this a regular part of the restaurant." "I think it could be incredible," she nodded, still processing the whirlwind of emotions. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. Inside, she felt a growing sense of possibility. The music had given her a voice, and for the first time in years, she considered the idea that she might step beyond the life she had always known. Over the next few days, the restaurant continued to buzz with excitement. Word of her performances spread, bringing in new customers eager to witness the unexpected talent of the quiet waitress. She began to feel a sense of anticipation every time she walked into work, a mixture of nerves and excitement that made her heart race. Her co-workers treated her differently too. There was a newfound respect in their glances, a subtle admiration that she had never experienced before. Some asked her questions about music, curious about her training and background. She answered carefully, sharing only what she felt comfortable revealing. The corner tables group eventually stopped coming. She noticed it and felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. They had learned a lesson in humility and respect. Their prank had backfired, and she had emerged stronger and more confident because of it. One evening, the manager spoke to her privately again. "People are asking about you online," he said. "They want to know if you'll perform more, maybe even outside the restaurant. Have you thought about what you might want to do?" She paused, considering the question. For years, she had kept her music hidden, content with private practice and small, personal performances. But now, the idea of sharing it more broadly no longer seemed impossible. The applause, the admiration, the connection she had felt with people, these were things she wanted to experience again, even if they scared her. I don't know yet," she admitted. "I've never done anything like that before." He smiled gently. "You've already faced a crowd, and you've amazed them. I think you can handle more than you realize, and you might discover opportunities you never imagined." The thought lingered in her mind as she returned to her duties. She moved through the restaurant with calm efficiency, but inside, her thoughts kept drifting to the piano. Each time she passed it, she felt its silent pull, urging her to play, to express, to share. That night, after the restaurant closed, she sat quietly in the empty dining room. She let her hands hover over the keys, remembering the faces of the diners, the warmth of their applause, and the incredible sense of connection she had felt. She played softly, tentatively at first, then with more freedom. The music filled the empty room, echoing off the walls and carrying a quiet triumph. For the first time in her life, she realized that her talent was not just a private escape, it was a gift meant to be shared. The prank that had started as an attempt to humiliate her had become the catalyst for transformation, revealing strength, courage, and brilliance she had long hidden. As she finally stood, letting her fingers lift from the keys, she felt a deep sense of clarity. Her life had shifted in ways she had never anticipated. The music was no longer a secret, and neither was her talent. She had stepped into the light, faced fear, and found her voice in a way that could never be taken away. She left the restaurant that night with a new sense of purpose. The city streets were quiet, and the cool night air felt refreshing against her skin. She realized that the prank, the nervous anticipation, the exposure, it had all led her here, to a place of recognition, respect, and newfound confidence. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled with music, opportunity, and the courage to share the parts of herself she had always kept hidden. The world had seen her, and she was ready to embrace it. The following evening, the restaurant was buzzing like never before. Word had spread quickly about the quiet waitress who had stunned everyone with her piano playing. People came from all over the city, curious to see if the stories were true. There were regulars who had arrived early to secure seats near the piano, and new diners who peeked through the windows, their eyes wide with anticipation. The air was thick with expectation, and the usual hum of conversation carried a new energy, one of excitement and curiosity. She arrived for her shift feeling a mixture of nerves and anticipation. Her uniform felt heavier than usual, her shoes slightly tight against her tired feet. But beneath it all, there was a quiet determination. She knew tonight could be different. She had played before, yes, but tonight, more people would see her. More people would judge her. And somehow, she found herself ready for it. As she moved between tables, taking orders and refilling glasses, she felt the subtle glances of diners tracking her every step. The corner table from previous nights was absent, but that only seemed to heighten the sense of attention from the rest of the room. Her co-workers gave her brief, encouraging smiles, and even the manager lingered near the entrance, watching her with a mix of curiosity and pride. The piano, polished and gleaming under the soft lights, seemed to wait for her. Its black surface reflected her own image faintly, and she felt a shiver of anticipation as she passed it. Her fingers itched to touch the keys, to let the music flow again, to transform nervous energy into something beautiful. She knew that once she sat down, there would be no turning back. A small group of diners at a corner table leaned forward as she approached, their phones ready. "Please play," one of them whispered, almost reverently. "We've heard about you. Everyone is talking about you." She hesitated, letting her hands rest lightly on her apron. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she took a deep breath and nodded. "I'll play," she said softly, her voice steady despite the nerves. The room quieted almost instantly. Conversations faded into whispers. Even the kitchen staff paused for a moment, catching sight of her as she walked toward the piano. It was as if the entire restaurant held its collective breath, waiting for the first note to sound. She sat down on the bench, adjusting herself slightly, fingers hovering above the keys. The first note was soft, tentative, almost fragile. But as she continued, the melody grew stronger, fuller, resonating through the room. Each chord carried a story of long hours of practice, of quiet nights spent alone with music, of a life hidden beneath the uniform of a waitress. The diners were captivated. Phones lowered as people realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Faces softened, eyes glistened, and even the most distracted patrons leaned forward in their seats. It was no longer just a performance. It was a shared experience, a quiet miracle unfolding in the ordinary setting of a restaurant. Her fingers danced across the keys effortlessly, moving with a fluidity and precision that made the piano sing. The notes flowed freely, full of emotion and depth. She played with abandon, allowing every feeling she had held back for years to come through the music. There was no hesitation, no doubt, only pure expression. The effect on the audience was immediate and profound. Some diners had tears in their eyes, quietly wiping them away as they watched. Others smiled with awe, unable to contain the joy and wonder that her music inspired. Conversations had ceased entirely, replaced by an unspoken reverence for the performance. Even the staff was transfixed. Servers paused mid-step, holding plates in their hands, captivated by the beauty of what they were hearing. The manager, standing near the front, watched with wide eyes, realizing that the impact of her performance went far beyond what he had anticipated. This was not just talent, it was brilliance, raw and undeniable. The group of pranksters from earlier nights would have been unrecognizable in their astonishment if they had been there. Their earlier arrogance and amusement had been replaced by humility and awe. What they had intended as ridicule had instead revealed something remarkable, something impossible to ignore. They had underestimated her entirely, and now they would remember that lesson for the rest of their lives. As she played, she lost herself in the music. Time seemed to stretch and bend around her, the hum of the restaurant fading into a quiet backdrop for the melody that carried her forward. Every note was intentional, every pause meaningful. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a musician, a storyteller, a conduit for emotion that could touch anyone who listened. The performance built gradually, moving from soft, introspective passages to more complex and powerful sequences. She allowed herself to feel every emotion fully: joy, fear, pride, longing, and to translate it into sound. The piano spoke what words could not, filling the space with a richness and depth that silenced everything else. People were leaning forward now, completely absorbed. Some held hands with friends or loved ones, feeling the music as a physical presence. Others closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, experiencing the story she told without needing to understand it in words. The restaurant had been transformed into a sanctuary of emotion, a temporary escape from the ordinary into something extraordinary. When the final note resonated and lingered, the silence that followed was almost unbearable. Then, slowly, the applause began. One table started, then another, until the entire restaurant was clapping, cheering, and whistling in admiration. People rose to their feet, some shouting her name, others simply celebrating the beauty they had witnessed. She remained seated for a moment, letting the sound of the applause wash over her. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration coursing through her. She had given everything she had to the music, and the response was overwhelming. For the first time, she felt truly seen, truly acknowledged, and truly appreciated. The manager approached her quickly, his eyes shining. "That was incredible," he said quietly. "I've never seen anything like it. People are talking about you everywhere. This could change everything." She nodded, still catching her breath. I just play," she said softly, almost in disbelief at the reaction. "No," he said firmly. "You don't just play. You inspire. You move people. And you deserve to be recognized for that." As she stood to return to her duties, she realized something important. The prank, the embarrassment, the nerves, they had all led her to this moment. What had started as a cruel joke had turned into an opportunity to reveal her talent, to touch lives, and to assert a part of herself she had kept hidden for far too long. The restaurant felt different now. The energy was lighter, more vibrant. People moved with a quiet excitement, sharing smiles and whispers about the performance they had just witnessed. Her co-workers were smiling knowingly, recognizing that they were part of something special. Even the kitchen staff peeked out occasionally, curious and impressed. Later, after the restaurant had closed and the last customers had left, she sat alone at the piano, fingers lightly brushing the keys. The room was quiet, but the memory of the evening filled every corner. She played softly, for herself this time, letting the music flow freely without the pressure of an audience. Each note was a reminder of her courage, her talent, and the transformation she had experienced. The experience had changed her. She no longer felt that she had to hide her abilities. She had faced judgment, fear, and the unknown, and had emerged stronger, more confident, and more alive than ever. The music was no longer a secret. It was a part of her identity that she could no longer ignore. In the following days, the restaurant became a hub of anticipation. People came specifically hoping to hear her play. The manager spoke to her about scheduling regular performances, about the potential for larger audiences, and even about opportunities outside the restaurant. Each suggestion made her heart race, but also filled her with a sense of possibility she had never allowed hers.